Hey everyone, welcome back to RM Transit. It's officially the holidays, at least for me, and I'm taking a well-deserved break here in Vancouver. It's my first vacation in a pretty long time, but you didn't expect me not to make transit videos, did you? The next few videos will be made on holiday, so please bear with me if there's any weird cat sounds or anything. That said, make sure to stay tuned for a very big video in the next week or so. It's going to be a special one. Today's video is about Go, back across the country from me in Toronto, and the very strange opposition and arguments I've seen against adding more stops to the system, particularly in the core of Toronto. Let's talk about that. If you're not already, make sure you're subscribed and you hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new videos I make. As you know, if you've watched the channel for any reasonable period of time, Toronto's GO Transit regional rail network is going through a major transformation, from a primarily commuter-oriented railway to something akin to an S-Bahn with frequent electrified service across the region. But there's surprisingly, perhaps not surprisingly, been pushback from a lot of suburban dwellers about changing what they see as their perfect system. They don't want change, or mainly slower trips and more stops on their train route. The first thing I have to do when refuting arguments that adding GO stops to the central area of the network is a bad idea is mention how far the nearest stations on each line are to Union Station GO. I'm only going to be talking about the frequent lines today, but you get the point. The closest station on the Lakeshore West line is Exhibition, at over 3 kilometers away from Union. The second closest is Bloor on the Kitchener line, which is 6.5 kilometers away from Union Station. Downsview Park on the Barrie line is 17 kilometers away, while Danforth on the Lakeshore East is 8 kilometers and Kennedy on the Stouffville line is 16 kilometers. As you can see, GO's nearest stations to Union Station are often very far away. In fact, on the Barrie and Stouffville lines, you're more than halfway out of the city by the time you actually hit the first stop. Also notable on these lines, by the time you get to the first stop, you're either at or close to the terminus station of the subway line that they connect with, which gives you a sense of just how wide those station spacings are. You're literally traversing half the length of a subway line out into the suburbs and not having a single station. Even Exhibition feels further away than you might expect. I mean, 3 kilometers feels longer than Exhibition feels. But that said, GO trains feel very fast. They also are massive, and so they can make long distances feel fairly short. That said, they can still do that with more stops. To put this in perspective, every single line, except for Lakeshore West, will get a new station which is much closer to Union in most cases. And in some cases, there'll actually be multiple new stops before Union. For example, the Barrie line, which will see new stations at Caledonia, Bloor, and all the way at Spadina. For the Kitchener line, the new station before Bloor Station will be at King Liberty, and that'll be about 3 kilometers away from Union Station, not dissimilar to how far Exhibition is from Union Station. Now that distance seems like a lot, but in that same east-west distance, Line 2 of the subway has 6 stops. Indeed, the older portions of the Toronto subway frequently have stations spaced about half a kilometer apart, while newer sections and subways broadly around the world tend to go for an average station spacing of around a kilometer. It's an average. Now the new Spadina Station on the Barrie line is quite close to Union, but even it is 1 kilometer away. Well, if you're a real hardcore commuter, maybe 1 kilometer away seems excessive. You have to remember, there's a lot between Spadina and Union. For one, you have tons of major offices. You also have the entire entertainment district, and to the south side of the rail corridor, you have Rogers Centre, which I think is actually closer to Spadina than to Union. You also have massive new developments like the Well, which is popping up at Spadina and Front, meaning there is a ton of trips going into that area. There's also the Spadina streetcar, which is super useful if, say, you're traveling on the Barrie line and you want to go to U of T, which is one of the largest universities in the country. In fact, it actually might be the largest university. I'll leave a fact on the screen if it is. Honestly, my only issue with Spadina Station is that we are still senselessly only stopping the Barrie line there when clearly all the Western lines should stop there. The reason being that it allows for easy transfers. Say you're traveling in from the Lakeshore line and you want to go up to Pearson. It would make for a great transfer point. I talked about that a lot more in a video up here, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but it's annoying. Given the Kitchener Line and Lakeshore West nearest stations are still 3 kilometers away from Union, they could stop at Spadina too, and their tightest station spacing, at 1 kilometer to Spadina, would still be the same as the average for new subway lines. So when people say,
they're turning Go into a subway.
Not really. Now the Lakeshore East and Stouffville lines, well, their new station, and really the only one planned between there and their next stations, respectively, is East Harbour. And East Harbour will be about 3 kilometers east of Union Station. Since their other stations aren't moving, it's still going to be a 5+ kilometer gap after you reach East Harbour. And so you could say in many cases, we're adding a few more city center stations, but once you've passed those city center stations, which again, there might be 1 maximum, you don't have a ton more stops. So then you speed up and go on your commute as usual. So are these stations just for Toronto residents? Well, yes, they will be useful to Toronto residents. Imagine people living at City Place who want to go to Barrie, or people living in the Distillery District that want to go to Oakville, or someone living in Weston that wants to go to East Harbour. Tons of new trips are going to be possible on regional rail, and yes, some of them will be within the city of Toronto. But lots will also be connecting people from the city of Toronto to surrounding areas, boosting their local economies with the power of all of the people that live near regional rail, especially in Toronto's core. To get a sense of what super high quality regional rail could look like, I might sometimes hop on the subway in Toronto and go somewhere to get dinner, and the ideal form of regional rail is that, hey, there's a nice restaurant in Mississauga or Brampton or Aurora, and I can get there pretty quickly on the train. Let's just go do that randomly because you have the option. Let's call this the dinner effect. Of course, for suburbanites, there are a ton of benefits too. Not everyone wants to go to Union, which is something we've seen on full display during the pandemic. There's no reason a suburbanite might not want to go to U of T, or Kensington Market, or Liberty Village, or the Portlands. So many of Toronto's best neighborhoods are sort of functionally disconnected from the GO Transit network because there isn't a stop on those various rail lines, and connecting them would create a whole new group of people who could actually visit these fantastic neighborhoods. There's also a dream that I want to mention, and that's about making Union less the center of the universe. Yes, I know. Imagine spreading transit demand and density to the areas surrounding the core, the Exhibitions and Dundas Wests and East Harbours of the world. Instead of having a single mega CBD, you could have the single CBD, but you could also have orbital satellite CBDs that have residential and tons of office space as well. These locations might initially seem somewhat unattractive because they're not just at the city center, and so everyone can't just take a one-seat ride to get to them, but they're all on rapid transit, they all have streetcar access, and they all have GO Transit service, just like Union. And because regional rail would be so fast and frequent, there's no reason that someone couldn't ride into Union, easily swap trains, and then ride back out 1 or 2 stops. It's actually one of the biggest benefits of regional rail in my personal perspective. And of course, some people would be able to directly access these sites, like if you're going to Dundas West and you live on the Kitchener line, or if you live on the other side of the city and your line through runs to one of these locations. This is another reason why a station like Spadina would be so useful, because people don't have to travel all the way to Union to head back west. Now, is all of this worth a major travel time hit? I would argue so. Most trips on GO are not 5 minutes long. They're 30, 40 minutes long, and a few minutes added onto a trip isn't really the end of the world, especially if it's a high quality trip. That said, most GO trips are going to get much faster, and I think people underappreciate how powerful electric trains will be for this. With electric trains accelerating so much faster and potentially having higher top speeds, standard trips will actually get much shorter, and so adding a few stations will actually net you the same trip time as before with diesel trains. Especially, and I really have to say this, if we get electric multiple units, please. There's actually something even more underappreciated than electrification that's going on, and that's going to speed up a lot of trips though, and that's the Union Station rail corridors reworking. Currently, most trains crawl through the complex mess of switches and signals that lead up to Union Station. It's one of the most painful parts of every GO trip because they often announce that you're arriving at Union Station long before you actually do. Part of the issue here is, again, the complex switches and signals, because the current routing is designed around flexibility, not a consistent regional rail service, which is what we're going for. Plans that Metrolinx has actually call for speeding up the Union Station rail corridor. They're already installing a massive new signaling system, and with the reworking of Union's platforms and the switches adjacent to the rail corridor, plans are to speed trains up going into Union Station to 50-60 kilometers per hour, which if you've seen a train going into Union Station right now, they really crawl, so that is impressive. Of course, talking about adding more stations, there's the simple fact that stop spacing doesn't need to be constant. It should be variable depending on your density. If you have a lot of jobs, you should have more stops. And if you have a major connection point, that's also worth adding a stop to. There's no hard and fast rule that says you can't have two stations that are close together. More stops currently means far more potential riders and opportunities for trips, because there are just journeys that you can't make if you don't have a stop in a certain location. Of course, there is a trade-off, and I've talked about this before, when you have stops that are way too close together, like on the Eglinton Crosstown. But Go is nowhere near that. First of all, the stops are much wider than, say, the LRT lines or even line 2 of the subway, but second, Go is faster and will have better acceleration. And so even if stops were close together, it would be able to handle them better than those lines. My point is, though, that Go is nowhere near the point where more stops are going to start discouraging riders. And the beautiful thing about Go is that there is often 3 or 4 tracks to work with. So you can have some express services, particularly for the trains that are legitimately coming from very far away and whose passengers may have been waiting a while. Go is just generally unconstrained too, in a way that the subway isn't, so there's no reason you couldn't, say, add passing tracks in a place or two along lines to have some faster rapid services bypass local ones. And all of this is the way things are being planned. I think this video has a lot of synergy. I know, I'm sorry for using that word. It is super corporate. With a video I made a while ago on busways. Basically, my point on that video was that transit riders are sort of misled by such systems because they're incredibly expensive to operate, and they have this really high cost per rider that creates a really good service but isn't necessarily sustainable. In the same way, Go in its pre-regional rail form wasn't sustainable. There were massive subsidies in the form of free parking and massively expensive parking garages. Literally, they were just subsidies. That's what they are. For Go to actually work in the future and be high functioning, it doesn't necessarily need to get rid of that. But what it needs to do is augment the system with something that more people can use who do not need to drive to stations. If you don't have stops within the dense areas of the city of Toronto, there are so many riders you're losing out on. And let's be honest, if a system is losing riders, then it's not functioning well as transit. And that should be what you care about if you want transit to succeed. If we're opening up a massive new market to people using the GO train, that's a good thing. That's going to make the GO train more successful, and it's actually going to mean that those commuter trips are potentially better and more sustainable in the long term because GO has another market that they also serve. Basically, a lot of GO's services feel unusually good because they're not necessarily financially sustainable. It's literally a too good to be true situation. With all of that said, I would take Go with a subway level stopping pattern any day. Thanks for watching.